Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
A thank you for something over the phone from someone you don't know? Isn't that a bit much? Similar questions will pop up in today's story. Enjoy the story! Trinity is located right in the middle of Jornada del Muerto, and yes, it means dead man's route. You're driving along a 2-lane highway that crosses the White Sands Missile Range deep in the Sonoran Desert of New Mexico. It was night, and the road was empty. The sky was like black velvet, and the stars shone with a clarity that can only be seen where there is absolutely no civilization. Occasionally, a meteor flashed on the horizon like a lonely snowflake. I was alone with my trusty Ford F-150 and the occasional armadillo. All I needed was an old stinky dog named Buster to turn it into a sad country song. I remembered a few days ago. It's funny how a simple decision can change your life. Cross the street or not, turn left or right, scratch the itch or not. We make hundreds of these decisions every day, and sometimes they can kill us. I couldn't point to anything specific, she just acted differently. There were too many details about her work, as if she were painting a picture, too much attention to schedules, as if she were watching me. Even her scrupulous fulfillment of marital duties seemed like she was trying to throw me off. She seemed to think that by having an intimate with me more often, I would become less suspicious of her. In today's world, it is too easy to get to the truth. In fact, people would cheat less if they knew how far technology extends. So, when that little devil called suspicion piqued my interest, I simply downloaded an expensive bluejacking program. The only problem is, you can find out things you don't want to know. Brenda was a great wife, smart, witty, beautiful, and a real beast in bed. How we met and got married is not important. Suffice it to say, we lived a happy middle-class life in the suburbs of Northeast Albuquerque for 14 years. We consciously decided not to have children so we could afford the best, a beautiful house, frequent trips, and expensive restaurants. Brenda was the epitome of cute, petite, with dark hair, dark eyes, and a very curvy figure, including stunning long legs. My wife worked as a PR consultant for a global firm that made a fortune paving paradise. Given New Mexico's sunny climate, home building development has been a lucrative industry for some time. The only problem was that the people living in this paradise might not want to pave it. Brenda, therefore, interacted a lot with big money and politicians. Her career was, for me, the equivalent of Dante's ninth circle of hell. You see, I'm a nerd, and nerds rarely go outside. I was doing botanical work at Sandia National Laboratories, which is why we lived in Albuquerque. The job was high-paying and low-stress because I was very good at what I did. I work in counterintelligence technology, a profession dedicated to lies and deceit, a kind of politics. The job requires a lot of old-fashioned machismo, but it's more Dr. Evil than Conan. Of course, the devil's cunning always defeats brute strength. You may be wondering how Brenda and I ended up in this hot girl and nerd situation. As I said, the details of our romance are unimportant. We got along because we were both smart, funny, and loved adventure. She had dated many athletes and handsome men. I'm not ugly, and I'm quite wealthy, so I also had affairs with attractive women. The problem was that everyone we were with before we met each other bored us to tears. You spend a significant portion of your life with one person after marriage, so it's better to choose someone who excites you. Brenda and I had completely different personalities, but we suited each other as if we were made for each other. This doesn't mean we walked around holding hands all the time. We had our own interests and special skills, but our complementary qualities strengthened our connection. Brenda's emotions made her a fascinating partner. There was never a dull moment with her. But sometimes her feelings got the better of her, and she counted on me to calm her down. I was too rational, and Brenda got me out of my head. Neither of us were big. Brenda was 5 feet 2 inches, and I could generously be called 5 feet 9 inches. But we were both completely healthy. We loved the outdoors, and Albuquerque was the perfect place for that. We hiked, biked, or kayaked daily. People thought we were the perfect couple. I think it was my short stature that gave Hondo the idea that Brenda would be an easy target. Richard Towell was our neighbor. He was a major in one of the training wings at Kirtland and played the role of the great American hero. He even gave himself a nickname. Nobody knew where he got it from, since he wasn't a pilot, but he preferred to be called Hondo. Most of us just called him Todd, mainly because he hated it. Todd was a big guy, half a foot taller than me and about 70 pounds heavier, a lot of it fat, while I didn't have an ounce of excess weight on my 175 pounds. The contrast in size made it look like I was only 3/4 of him, and he wasn't shy about pointing it out. Every guy has been bullied at some point, most either tolerate it or fight back, but there are some fun alternatives. I've always had a sharp wit. My standard response to bullies was a witty remark that everyone understood except the bully. The key was to make sure the guy realized he'd been defeated only when he turned around and walked away, his head hanging low. So, when Hondo patronizingly called me Little Davy, I just laughed at myself and responded, "Not where it matters, little big guy." The confused look on his face as he burst out laughing was priceless. The snake came into my garden because people in our area loved to have parties. I was interested in many things, none of which included gossip, hints, or outright judgments about the daily affairs of distant acquaintances. But Brenda basked in it. I could never figure out if her circle of friends truly enjoyed each other's company or if the parties were simply a battleground for them to mark their territory. All I knew was that there was too much drinking and too much contact between various participants. I went to these dreadful events because that's what good husbands do. However, since I couldn't care less about golf or the Albuquerque Isotopes win-loss record, I always found myself among the secondary spouses while the insiders enjoyed the herd mentality. The usual course of events, a cheerful arrival, then machine gun chatter of small conversations until they caught up with the events of the long 6 days they'd been separated. Then, with the wheels of the social machinery lubricated by copious amounts of alcohol, the participants settled down for the real purpose of the evening, cozy, drunken conversation. These discussions typically involved overly intimate touching, questionable leaning, and melodramatic outpourings of emotion over topics that would seem trivial if both parties were sober. Brenda thrived on this. She told me she was a people person. Well, that was undeniable. But she also liked playing the role of confessor for her clueless friends. Vampires need to drink blood, and Brenda seemed to have the same need for gossip. However, I learned some very shocking things about the supposedly happily married residents of our area at one of these parties. It was quite the revelation. Todd was hunched over, looking dejected, and Brenda was holding his hand tenderly with both of hers. I might have believed his act if Todd hadn't been staring hungrily at Brenda's cleavage as he poured out his heart. I hated this guy for many reasons, beyond his fake macho persona, and this scene added another point to the list. Todd was a tireless womanizer. He told anyone stupid enough to ask that it was his privilege as the alpha male of the group. We all thought it was because he was an immoral jerk. We usually ignored him, unless he was flirting with your wife, then the instinct to get her out of his clutches kicked in. So, I casually said, even though I was seething inside, "Come on, Brenda, it's getting late." She raised her head, anger flashing across her face, and said, "Don't you see we're discussing something important here, Davy?" This was a new and unusual reaction. I realized then that I was caught in something deeper. Hondo took on a noble look of grief and said, "No, Brenda, you've helped me a lot. You need to go home to your husband." He then patted her hand sadly, stood up, and disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a broken and defeated Saint Brenda. She was furious the whole way home. It turned out that Todd's wife, the woman he had loved since their graduation from Texas A&M University, was cheating on him, and he was devastated. They were the perfect couple. Todd was a brash, narcissistic jerk, and Polly was an empty-headed, narcissistic doll who had once been Miss Texas World. She was stunning in a boo-boo-boom way, unless you had to talk to her. People only have so much blood in their body, and in Polly's case, it was obvious that her huge breasts were siphoning off the blood that should have been going to her brain. But I digress. Todd had lain in wait for Brenda in a dark corner to ask for advice when I stumbled upon their cozy conversation. Brenda was helping him manage his grief. I didn't believe it for a second, but Brenda loved sentimental melodramas and was unhappy that I had ruined her little tete-a-tete. According to St. Brenda, Todd had found some incriminating material on Polly, and it was tearing him apart. Any sane person would immediately call this nonsense. Todd was so tireless in his pursuit of anything that wore a dress that he had many of his own adventures. But Brenda bought the story entirely. In the ensuing argument, Brenda tried to justify her desire to listen to the smug jerk by telling me that he was actually very sensitive under all that bravado. Of course, this remark opened up another front. I said angrily, "And how do you know what might be hiding under Teen Towel's appearance? Did you spend time in his treehouse?" Brenda looked really embarrassed and said, "Well, he came by a few times to talk to you, but you were never home." It amazed me. There wasn't even an attempt to be subtle. I said, "Have you considered that maybe his target is you?" Brenda was genuinely puzzled. "Why should he want to talk to me? You're the one with great government powers." He said he had something to discuss regarding clearance. "Talk about an attention," I said. "Listen, Brenda, you're the prettiest woman on the block. All the guys think so." Brenda gave me that typical feminine look that said she loved hearing it but hated that it came from me because it fueled jealousy. I continued, "The camel just wanted to see how far under the tent he could get his big, fat lips. I hope you didn't invite him inside." She looked unsure. "I invited him several times. He asked permission to wait for you, but he didn't stay long." I asked, more disgruntled, "How many times has this happened, and why wasn't he here when I got home?" Brenda looked like something was starting to sink in. "Well, for the last month, it's been 3 or 4 times a week. He stopped by on his way home from Kirtland, but you were always at work. We talked, but he had to go home, or Polly would have been worried." I laughed out loud. That's the biggest nonsense I've ever heard. Since when does Towel care what his wife thinks? Brenda looked at me indignantly. He values his marriage very much. He constantly tells me how lucky we are to have each other. He wants what we have. That's why I was so supportive when he told me about Polly's affair. I said angrily, "He wants something I have, and it better stay a wish. From now on, tell Hondo to call me if he needs to talk. I don't want him alone with you." Brenda snapped back, "You can't tell me what to do. This isn't the Middle Ages." The conversation was heading down a dark road, so I tried to compromise. "If he comes around again, just call me at work. I'll be home in less than 10 minutes. I knew this would scare the beast away. Of course, there was no intim that night or for several weeks after. However, we loved each other, and the ice gradually melted. By the end of the month, we had completely forgotten about the incident. Santa Fe is 1,500 feet above sea level, so even if it's hot in Albuquerque, it's always pleasant. Additionally, Santa Fe has the quirkiest art scene in the U.S. Brenda and I are both fans of Georgia O'Keeffe, and her museum had several originals for sale. The paintings were about $1.5 million, but I set my sights on a signed lithograph, thinking we could get it for around $3,000. We went there to try our luck. Sometimes, we'd camp out, but this was a trip for fine art, so we stayed at the Hotel Five Graces, relatively close to the museum. The place looked like a hacienda, with faux adobe walls and chunky Spanish furniture. The bed looked like it had been carved by Ferdinand and Isabella in some monster shop. Ornamental didn't even begin to describe it, which was fitting because Brenda was finally in the mood. My wife had been distant all month. I attributed it to the towel controversy. She thought I was cruel and insensitive, while I thought she acted like an idiot. We actually made love more often than usual, but it wasn't the all-encompassing extravagance we were used to. Obviously, some tender feelings remained. Night fell as we finished our meal at a nearby restaurant. There's something special about a warm evening sunset in Santa Fe. The air is soft, and the light has a unique red-gold hue. The sky was almost purple, with bright stars and a crescent moon rising in the northeast, making you want to howl. Brenda's look told me there would be plenty of howling tonight. She wore a little black dress with a turquoise necklace I bought her that afternoon. Brenda's of Italian descent, and the contrast of the bright blue stones against her smooth, dark Mediterranean skin was stunning. She has one of those perfectly proportioned faces, with huge brown eyes and thick, dark brown hair and a stylish pixie cut that highlights her high cheekbones and pointed chin. When she focuses her deep eyes on someone, there's almost nothing they won't give her, making her an effective negotiator. But it's her full, sculpted lips that really stop the action. Movie stars pay fortunes to get lips like hers. We usually spend some time preparing for a night rather than just diving into it, but my wife was on a mission. As soon as we entered the room, she pulled me into the bedroom by my tie. Brenda had never done anything like this in our entire marriage. We had an intim, and afterward, we lay side by side in the moonlight, holding hands. I almost asked her about it then. I should have, but the warning signs were still too new, and we had been married too long to suddenly confront it. So, I guess it's natural to shy away. I mean, seriously, who is brave enough to bet their happiness on one roll of the dice? After a fantastic night of intimate, your life can take a much darker path if you get snake eyes. I had a great career, a beautiful wife, and life was good, so I thought, let's leave the questions for another time. Brenda turned to me and said, almost desperately, I love you, Davy. Never forget this, you are my man. We grow old together, just you and me. It was a fitting end to a very strange evening. The next day, we walked slowly to the museum. Brenda is a sophisticated, petite woman with a compact body who looks stunning in stylish shorts. Latin American men are less reserved than Germans or Norwegians when it comes to the kind of fifth place she puts on display. Therefore, as we walked, they looked at her meaningfully. I smiled and said, you have a fan club. A guy passing by crashed into a mailbox. This was the essence of our marriage. Some men see their wives as trophies, living proof of their masculinity. I've never seen Brenda in that light. She was my equal, my partner. Her beauty was just one aspect of her contribution to our relationship. Her energetic spirit and loving, warm heart made her who she was. But now, I find myself in a dilemma. The more I pressed my wife about how Thud had been fooling her, the more she insisted that I was being evil and jealous. At the same time, I couldn't confront Thud directly and tell him to stop his act of treason. I'd look like a paranoid weakling. I refrained from any action, hoping Brenda would come to her senses on her own or that Thud would overplay his hand. At the end of the day, you have to trust your wife. She's the only person in this cruel world you can rely on, and it's a very slippery slope if you start to doubt. Maybe I'm too cynical, but I thought Brenda's innate faith in humanity was her Achilles heel. This made her a logical victim for anyone cruel enough to take advantage of her kindness. Of course, you have to be an immoral scoundrel to do this, but I knew one person who fit that description. Shakespeare was the first to write it down, all the world's a stage, and the people in it are actors. In short, what you think is reality is written and directed by you in your own head. Thud could have been a joke in his role as Captain America, alpha male of the pack, but alas, he didn't know this. In fact, he believed he was entitled to all the privileges, and that's exactly what he did. His aggressive attempt to pull Brenda into his orbit made him a threat because she couldn't see it. So, I had to do something. I guess some people actually cheat and don't get caught, but most couples are exposed because cheating is difficult. You need to keep track of all the usual things plus a bunch of unusual ones, and ordinary people can't cover all aspects. This is why people who do things they shouldn't inevitably reveal themselves. Strange behavior always has a logical explanation. This rule applies to all aspects of life. For example, scientists discovered the planet Neptune this way. They noticed that Uranus's orbit was irregular, made calculations, and found Neptune, which was pulling it. This is why the phenomenon of hidden influence is called the planetary body principle. The same applies to cheating. There's always some sinister force behind a change in normal behavior. Watching Thud and Brenda interact at parties, I saw how he tried to pull her into his orbit, so I decided to cross the Rubicon. I used the 6 days before the next party to visit the dark web and buy a simple package from a middleman. I kept it innocent, because you quickly become a target of scrutiny from both foreign and domestic agencies if you start purchasing military hacking tools. At the next barbecue, I sat with the rest of the nerds while Thud wandered around, looking like someone had shot his dog. Brenda, as I had asked her not to, carefully followed him. I scanned Thud's phone. It was, of course, unlocked. He never worried about things like protecting his phone from me. The only reliable way to protect him from me would have been to run him over with a car, but I digress. It took less than a minute to install my little program on his phone. She immediately sent Brenda a photo of an adorable kitten. The malware was hidden in steganography. She opened the photo and cast a pleased glance at Thud. The rootkit she launched when she did this did the rest. Thud looked puzzled, which was natural since both of them had no idea how much hidden crap I had just added to the background processes on their devices. Everything they did from that point on, photos, calls, and messages, was under my control and saved in a cloud account that I controlled. I looked at my wife as she comforted Thud. She was wearing a short summer dress with her deliciously long, tanned legs peeking out from underneath and an inviting cleavage framed by straps. She radiated life and happiness. I felt a wave of melancholy. I said under my breath, "Brenda, I barely knew you." It was a paradox of paradoxes. I wanted to know, I needed to know, but I didn't want to find out. Healthy people do not dwell on events that could destroy their lives. It just proved that I wasn't as cool and reserved as I wanted to appear. The world is a tough place, and a good marriage gets you through the crap. It gives you a companion and a friend, no matter the threat or circumstance. So I really wanted to chalk up my suspicions to simple paranoia. I could live with a low opinion of myself. What I couldn't bear was a discovery that would destroy my orderly and happy life. A figurative symbol of the commitment between two people is their willingness to limit their intimate relationships only to each other. Seriously, you can't share your private self with more than one person and maintain a special connection. And you can't trust someone who thinks they can. The problem is that humans are not naturally monogamous, so it takes a conscious effort of will to remain faithful. A strong and moral person will keep their promises, people without honor won't. In a sense, loyalty is a litmus test of a person's character. I had known Brenda for a very long time and knew how important personal integrity was to her. So I couldn't imagine any circumstances in which she would knowingly compromise her precious sense of self, especially just to scratch an itch, theoretically speaking. But if you're secretly trying to learn something, don't be surprised when you find out something you don't want. Still, I was shocked. The fatal call occurred at 9:23 a.m. on Monday after the party. It was Thud. Thud said, radiating genuine gratitude, "Brenda, you are the only person who understands what I am going through. I would have committed suicide if it weren't for your love. It's so hard to keep our hands to ourselves, knowing what we shared." My heart sank to my feet. Brenda said, with irritation in her voice, "I already told you, Richard, I don't love you. I love my husband. I'm only doing this to help you adjust to your new life without Polly." What? My brain went into DEFCON 1 alarm mode. Thud said, in a voice full of regret, "I know that, but this is the only thing that helps me stay afloat. Can we meet again? I really need your special comfort." Brenda said, her voice softening, "I understand. I would feel the same way if I found out Davy was cheating on me. We may meet for the last time, but you'll have to deal with this without my help. I don't want to lose my marriage because of your problems." Seriously, has this woman completely lost her mind? The rest of the call was only about arrangements. Thud was going to be in Holloman on Air Force business, and he wanted Brenda to meet him in Alamogordo this coming Wednesday. It was over 200 miles away, so this probably seemed like a safe distance to meet. Brenda hesitated, but Thud's pitiful groan finally overcame her resistance. Brenda's company owned a fleet of small two-seat helicopters. They used them to fly around the region, practically a necessity in real estate development in New Mexico, where desert areas aren't close to each other. Brenda had a private helicopter pilot's license and was used to flying to different places. It was one of her more interesting quirks. She could easily fly to Alamogordo and back within one business day. You might think that my wife was either a complete idiot or a woman of easy virtue. No one with an IQ higher than room temperature would buy this, but Thud had been persistently and purposefully trying to deceive her for a long time. It looks like he succeeded. Brenda was kind, warm, and sentimental by nature. She loved puppies and kittens and cried at every sentimental movie. Unfortunately, she was also willing to deceive herself into believing that people were telling the truth. The call ended, and Brenda said, "I'll meet you at the usual place, but this is the last time." Thud said, with a voice full of tears, "Yes, I know. And thank you." My first reaction was mixed, like Wile E. Coyote when he realizes he's run off a cliff, and like Wile E., it was immediately followed by a long fall, tearing your insides across the desolate landscape. How could Brenda be so stupid? Stroke, heart attack, take your pick. You're walking down the street carefree, and then your life changes. all old certainties evaporate, giving way to a terrifying, all-consuming feeling of despair and hopelessness. That's how it hit me. The first burst of anger was directed at myself. I underestimated them. He was such a caricature of a person that I just assumed everyone could see right through him. But, of course, I wasn't there for the long hours he spent at our kitchen table painting a different picture for my wife. Thud must have convinced Brenda that he was sensitive and sincere, a real sweet guy underneath all that show. In fact, he may have used what Brenda knew of his disgusting personality as a form of mental judo to convince her that his brazen behavior was meant to protect his gentle self from a harsh, cruel world. It would be like an illegal substance for Brenda since that social development never progressed beyond the age of 14. It probably did not occur to him that there might be consequences. I'm not a physical type, but I have certain skills, and I plan to give Towel a hell of a life. It was Monday, and I had business in Sandia, but the burning anger in my heart demanded satisfaction. I didn't know the whole story yet. In fact, I didn't even know for sure that anything had happened. My little program hadn't found any new information since Monday morning. However, I was preparing for the worst. I was going to be in Alamogordo for the final act because I needed to officially close the book with Brenda. Then I could suffer in peace. Of course, my decision to end everything on Wednesday meant that I would have to endure 2 nights with a woman who perfectly played the role of my adoring wife. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. It simply means that people combine contradictory facts into a convenient truth. Essentially, a person is divided into 2 contradictory personalities. Tonight, I dealt with the real Brenda, loving and devoted. The time-altering version only appeared when I wasn't around. I tried to look for any signs that my wife thought she was betraying me. All I saw was love and loyalty. Her eyes shone with devotion as we dined at La Crêpe Mitchell, a small restaurant we loved for its vegetarian dishes. She truly believed her lies. This made me wonder if she had gone crazy. Maybe the stress of cheating turns a person into a crazy person, especially if they are essentially decent people. Even so, temporary insanity can be an excuse for murder, but it doesn't justify cheating. I could have begged Brenda not to go and told her I knew the whole story, but nothing in our situation would change. She had already crossed the point of no return, therefore, my goal was retribution, not reconciliation. Towel should have been severely punished, and it would have been a masterful execution of the hacker's art. Firstly, I needed photographs, the more candid, the better. Then I was going to expose Towel's sordid life to all of his contacts, his wife, his mother, his pastor, all the way down to his commanding officer, and possibly the Secretary of the Air Force. The beauty was that I wouldn't leave any traces because it would be his own phone sending incriminating evidence. He would know it was me, but everyone else would wonder why this man decided to commit career and personal suicide in intoxication from access to a person's fate in one handheld device. Then I would really give him hell. I was going to post his personal information, name, date of birth, and social security number, in its entirety on all the message boards on the dark web. By the end of the day, Towel would have 150 new mortgages and several thousand fresh Visa cards. Plus, Interpol and the FBI would be looking for him to talk to after the fruits of this atrocity. I planned to send him a note, probably to his new address under the bridge. Seriously, Towel, don't thank me. It was my pleasure. Revenge truly is best served cold. I left for work at the usual time. Brenda was as beautiful and energetic as ever when she kissed me goodbye. I just couldn't understand it. The love in her eyes was real. She'll have to explain that to me the next time we talk. Of course, this will be after the expulsion from Eden. The trip takes 4 hours by car, so I arrived in Alamogordo close to 2 o'clock. It was about an hour and a half going 120 miles per hour as the crow flies. Brenda's Denali H-3 helicopter was parked in the desert behind the Quality Inn and Suites on White Sands Boulevard. It was a yellow and white helicopter that she especially enjoyed flying. Since Brenda had already arrived, I decided to get down to business. It was your standard chain of hotels serving Air Force Hollowmen. I walked into the lobby dressed in business casual attire, and the receptionist didn't even look at me. I sat down in one of the chairs in the lobby and used my iPad to hack into the hotel server. It only took a few minutes. They were in room 2117, which Towel booked in his name. I thought, what an arrogant fool. I don't like unpleasant confrontations. They solve nothing and often get out of control. My profession gives me access to cool military toys. That's why I took Arver with me. This is one of those technological marvels that came out of Afghanistan. Our guys want to know the situation before they knock down the door, and that's why they use Arver. It is a black plastic device with a flat probe designed to look under any standard door frame, hence the name. The camera gives the user a panoramic view of the room. It records HD audio and video, and there are 4 infrared channels in case the room is dark. This would give me everything I need to destroy him. Well, I could hear everything as I carefully inserted the device into the room. This froze me for a moment and gave the knot that was now permanently lodged in my stomach another painful turn. However, it was good for me. It strengthened my resolve. From that moment on, there was no turning back. They left the curtains open. After all, it was the 2nd floor, so the stage was well lit. I had everything I needed. I put the device away, placed it in my backpack, and went down to the Starbucks in the lobby to await my fate. I sipped on a decent nutty coffee while using Filmmaker Pro to create a 1-minute highlight reel. It was a compromising and extremely hot little clip. I kept it short on purpose. Some servers have size filters, and I wanted to make sure the whole world saw Towel's betrayal. I also didn't want the viewer's attention to wane. I had Thud portrayed in his film debut as an extremely unfaithful husband. His face was the center of attention throughout the entire video. I had edited it carefully to avoid showing Brenda's face. I didn't want to spread my cuckold status to the entire internet, and I still loved this stupid woman. When the clip was ready, I emailed it from Thud's phone. It was at the top of his pants pocket, which he hastily kicked off before having a night with my wife. Isn't wireless technology great? I sent incriminating evidence to his 139 phone contacts with the title Fun Times. This must have really released a stench into the sorority house. As soon as I got home, I planned to dump it on the dark web, but I needed the anonymous Tor browser for this. No one in their right mind would dare enter this terrible place without protection. At exactly 3 o'clock, the elevator doors opened, and Richard Thud Towel stepped out. He didn't notice me. Why would he? I shouldn't have been there. He looked smug and satisfied, like every cat that ate the canary. I hated him. Luckily for my sanity, his phone rang as he began to cross the lobby. He answered happily. There was a long silence while someone spoke. Then Thud's face took on an expression of absolute bewilderment, which was soon replaced by an expression of horror. He argued for several seconds, then the person on the other end suddenly hung up. Thud ran out to his car in a panic and sped back down White Sands Boulevard. Apparently, his wife or boss had just seen his little indiscretion. I was enjoying the beginning of the end of his overly complacent life when the elevator dinged again, and my wife stepped out. She looked both beautiful and thoughtful. It was clear that she had a lot on her mind. She walked toward the back of the hotel where her helicopter was parked, her eyes downcast. It was the walk of shame of a traitor. Then she felt a presence in front of her, stopped, and looked up, irritation in her eyes. That look turned into an expression of incomprehension, and then realization dawned on her. This is called vasovagal syncope, caused by shock. The more common term is fainting. At first, her eyes expressed pure amazement, then they rolled away. The last thing I wanted was a scene. Luckily, the guy at the front desk had disappeared. I sat her there, still supporting her with my hand. She came to her senses almost immediately, looked embarrassed, and then she realized whose arms she was lying in. Luckily, it was just the two of us there. I said as kindly as possible, I don't want you to explain anything. All I want is to take care of the necessary final formalities. Brenda's face collapsed. She said in a voice filled with sorrow, "Oh God, Davy, this shouldn't have happened." I thought to myself, what did you think was going to happen, Sherlock? But I said, you know what I do. She grabbed me by the shoulders in panic and said, you have to let me explain. It's not what it seems. I thought they never have new or original lines. I said, it's exactly what it seems, honey. Do you want to repeat it? I clicked the icon on the iPad, and we both heard her. Her face melted into tears. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed inconsolably, muttering over and over, you were never supposed to know. We were still alone in the lobby, and I wanted to avoid hysteria, so I pointed to the women's restroom and said, "Why don't you go there and get yourself cleaned up? We'll talk at home tonight. I have a long road ahead of me." She nodded, despair written all over every aspect of her beautiful face. She said plaintively, "I love you, Davy. Only you." I stood up and looked at her sitting on the couch, then said with complete honesty and sincerity, "I love you too, Brenda. That's why it's so difficult. It's already too late. We'll talk at home." I turned on my heel and walked as calmly as possible toward the parking lot. The sounds of a woman crying rang in my ears. I started to feel shaky, so I stopped at the first place I saw on the northern route. I needed a drink. The waitress, who looked like something out of a tattoo and piercing museum, brought me a beer. Beer was a necessity. I began to experience the effects of shock, nausea, and chills. I realized that I needed to quickly get back to the car, otherwise, I would not make it home. On the way, I enjoyed thinking about the nightmare I had created for Towel. The look of absolute horror on his face was priceless, and the best part was that he hadn't seen anything yet. The real pain would come when the dark web finished its work. As I said, there are much better ways to get revenge than going to jail, like ruining the idiot's life. However, there was also a pathetic little bird whose soul I had just crushed. I saw it in her eyes. She knew the price. This is not just a matter of lost trust or my ego, this is a simplified view of cheating. The exclusive bond was severed, and every aspect of our special connection disappeared. We could no longer say, "Just you and me forever." The ghost of Richard Towell would always be between us, saying, "But I was there too." We all have our weaknesses. Some lucky people manage to live their entire lives without becoming victims of exploitation. However, more often than not, your personal shortcomings become your undoing. Worse, there is always collateral damage, like when the one you supposedly hold closest is pulled into the abyss with you. This is the reality we both know. For me, I had that empty feeling when you realize you're in deep trouble without an oar. I needed to take action to address Brenda's infidelity, but what should I do? Divorce her? Bury it in the garden? Live like a cuckold? I'm not into violence, and I'm not a cuckold, so door number one seemed like the only viable option. We would talk, but now Brenda was a stranger to me. I had no idea what could have motivated her to commit such a painful act. It was completely out of character for her. As I thought, I assumed that we had a common vision for the future. Obviously, this was not true. There would be no more happy, intimate moments, no more enjoying the little things in life, and no more growing old together. This would be a painful separation for both of us. We were just two strangers alone in a strange land. It was completely dark as I drove through the Mockingbird Mountains and into the desolate region leading to State Road 525. Sirius XM was playing Blake Shelton's "When Someone Knows You So Well." The words were bitterly ironic. I was driving through the bleak landscape of the Sonoran Desert. It was hard to believe that this barren wasteland was the starting point for the future of humanity. Our modern era began at 5:29 a.m. on July 16, 1945. That's when the proof of concept for a nuclear device flashed across the desert sand in front of me. Its code name was Trinity. Robert Oppenheimer coined it, supposedly referring to the poetry of John Donne. The splitting of the atom changed everything about human existence. The scientists who did it had no idea whether their little creation would work or what would happen when they pressed the button. Therefore, they wanted to conduct the test as far from civilization as possible. The U.S. Air Force bombing and gunnery range at Alamogordo was an ideal location for this. It was 100 miles of harsh wasteland, full only of lizards and snakes. The only structure within a 20-mile radius was the building where they were assembling the bomb. When they were finished, they hoisted their creation onto a 100-foot-tall steel tower that stood on four legs sunk 20 feet into the desert. Then, the world witnessed the dawn of the nuclear age. The explosion turned the sand into a new radioactive material called trinitite, and Oppenheimer, who was something of a poet, was quoted as saying, "Now I have become death, destroyer of worlds." I was approaching the road leading to Trinity itself. The landscape was illuminated by the strange silvery light that comes from a night sky with trillions of stars and a full moon. The road was to my right, easily visible. My car's headlights illuminated the historical marker, and I saw a small figure standing at the intersection, looking straight at me. It was the strangest, most amazing vision imaginable. I braked sharply and stopped. This supposedly alien character walked into the cone of light from my headlights. She was a young woman of incredible beauty, small but unusually curvy. I could tell she was extremely attractive because she was wearing a tight black suit that hugged her from her neck to her boots. Her skin was flawless porcelain, and her pretty face was elven, with huge, wide-set green eyes and short black hair. The suit had some strange insignia over her surprisingly prominent left breast, and she wore a device on her right arm that looked like the monitors YouTube pilots wear. I knew there were several secret airfields in the area, including Stallion Air Force Base, which I was soon passing, so forgive me if I just assumed she jumped out of a spy plane. I got out of the car. She stood on long and slender legs, one hip tilted to the side, looking at me with a slight smile. It was a strange reaction for someone who had just parachuted from 65,000 feet. I said, concerned, "Are you okay, ma'am? Can I take you to a place where you can contact your people?" She replied in a melodious voice, "No, oh thank you. I simply determined my coordinates. Everything here is so confusing." It was a strange answer. It was as if she was refusing an offer of a ride home from work. I said, "There's nothing here for miles, ma'am. Let me take you to a place where you can make a call." "How did you get here?" She looked at me like I was an idiot and said, "Through the portal, of course." "Why are you asking?" Okay, this had gone from weird to crazy. I tried to remain calm so as not to upset the eccentric woman. "And where is this portal, ma'am?" She waved her hand toward the northeast and said, "There. It's a long way, you know." She gestured in the direction of the black obelisk marking the 0 point, 4 miles away. I said, still trying to sound conversational, "So you came here through a portal that transported you from some other place, right? And where exactly is this other place?" She made a sound that resembled a combination of coughing and sighing and looked at me expectantly. She then added, "I needed to leave, it wasn't safe." "Okay, let's play along with the crazy lady." I said, "So you were running away from something?" "I can't pronounce it." "Who are they?" She said, "These are intergalactic predators, and my planet is their new hunting zone. I was lucky that I was at my post in the transport center when they came." Her tone suggested that everyone knew about the GRU. She then stopped and seemed to be thinking about something. She added reassuringly, "Don't worry, I turned off the portal when I jumped, they won't be able to get here." Well, at least this conversation was more interesting than country music. I said, "Okay, let's say you are who you say you are. Then why do you look human, and why can we communicate in English?" "Except for some words," she said cheerfully. "English, is that what your language is called?" She then added, "I'm speaking straight into your mind, but some of the things we talk about don't have concepts that can be translated." So my little crazy lady claimed to be a telepath. She continued, "All life forms of our type have evolved from one basic design. This is the most effective natural structure, so of course, we are similar." I laughed and said, "You have the answer to everything, don't you?" She smiled sweetly and said, "Why are you so sad?" It amazed me. I said, "How do you know I'm sad?" "It was probably my body language," she added with a voice full of innocent curiosity. "Is it because your companion has just been busy with another man?" I slammed on the brakes, stopping the car right in the middle of the road, and stared at her in horror. I said anxiously, "How do you know this?" "Who are you?" She said, "My name is Stella, and as I said, I am from the Kaufsai in the Perseus sleeve of our galaxy. Your sun is in the outer arm, so we're practically neighbors." She smiled at me playfully and then just sat there looking at me as if she had just made a joke. No need to tell me, of course, I knew she was delirious, but to play along with her, I said, "If you are from an advanced race of aliens, why are you here in the middle of the desert? You would think that your people would set up their arrival point in a more convenient and civilized place." She said, as if lecturing a child, "The builders install a portal at a point where they find irrefutable evidence that a culture has reached a level at which it is worth studying." I said, "So the explosion of the first atomic bomb was like a signal for your people?" Damn it, now I'm starting to sound like her. She nodded and said, yes, there are billions of civilizations in our galaxy, but only the advanced ones are interesting. She said it as if everyone should know. The crazy lady continued, builders actually prefer a remote access point. This allows them to come and go in secret. We have been studying your planet for more than 70 years. We even lost one of our first expeditions here, not far away. She probably meant Roswell. The woman was definitely suffering from some form of psychosis. Seriously, she truly believed that she was an alien, so I couldn't just leave her at the bus station in Albuquerque. I mean, it wouldn't be right to leave a woman who was so delusional. The problem was that I was rushing home to discuss the end of my marriage, and I knew the conversation would get tense if I showed up with this adorable little thing in tow. It would be like pouring a gallon of gasoline on a burning fire. So no pressure at all, Stella said with sympathy. You can leave me if I prevent you from bumping into your companion. I didn't slow down. I had become accustomed to her reading my facial expressions as if she were actually reading my thoughts. However, I realized that I had made a commitment. My new friend was definitely a decent person. I said, I don't know your story, but I can't just leave you like that. I need to find help for you. Beauty like hers wouldn't last 2 minutes on the rough streets of Albuquerque. I said, I don't know how you knew, but you're right. I just saw my wife with another man, and in my culture, that is the harshest form of betrayal. Now I am returning home to negotiate our separation. I needed to watch myself, otherwise, she would involve me in her delusions. Stella, the star girl, was very convincing. She nodded and said, yes, that is true. In most family-based cultures, this ensures the origin of offspring. In my world, it doesn't matter since all children are raised by the central Tosi and Sai. I assumed it was her untranslatable word for government. She added seriously, of course, couples can choose to commit themselves exclusively. It's very romantic, but the Sai hiccup they implant during the bonding ceremony kills them if they have extramarital affairs. The bonding hiccup was clearly technology, perhaps we should have one of these. It would definitely make couples take fidelity more seriously. I smiled at the thought and said, we haven't gotten there yet, but our technology is good enough that you can always find out if a person is cheating. That's how I caught my wife, and the guy who seduced her will definitely regret it when I'm done ruining his life. Stella said thoughtfully, I never wanted to tie myself down. Night is too much fun to be limited to just one man. On the other hand, sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be so attached to a man. I said, this is wonderful and scary. The intimacy that two people share far outweighs the lack of variety in partners. Brenda and I made up for any limitations we experienced with exceptional frequency and quality. The exclusivity of our connection made intimacy so much more meaningful. Damn it, I forgot, our exclusivity is now in the past tense. I tried to remain calm, after all, I was talking to a crazy person. But I couldn't stop the angry thoughts in my head. This was the archetypal duality that infidelity creates. I loved Brenda and I hated her. The more I thought about it, the more I considered that killing Towel might not be such a bad idea. Stella said soothingly, killing another man is not the solution. You've already done much worse by exposing him as a predator. You need to talk to your date, find out why she did this. Without knowing this, you will not be able to move on. Okay, this is getting weird, I said. My mind is in turmoil right now. I don't know how you do it, but you're right. I want Towel to live long and painfully, but Brenda is different. I tried to explain, you can't just turn off your feelings for a person who is such a significant part of your life. My wife and I had an exclusive relationship, it was a living creature. Now it's dead, and I'm feeling it. My feeling of alienation is not a matter of ego or jealousy, this is a constant psychological barrier. I have lost all faith in her. My adorable little star girl added sympathetically, yes, I can feel it. Is it true you can feel the end of other people's hopes and dreams? Can you? I said with resignation. My rational mind tells me that I need to forgive and forget, but my heart just won't let me do it. I would have reconciled with Brenda instantly if it had been something spontaneous, but I know that she met him more than once. So this was a planned and deliberate betrayal. Now I faced the long and painful process of unraveling our lives. It helped to say it out loud, even to a crazy person. It also reminded me that sitting next to me was a supposedly alien woman from the planet Kofsai in a tight black suit. I said, hoping to find out the truth, honestly, isn't there someone you can call? She said sadly, no, closer than 6 or 7,000 light years, and they've probably already been eaten. She turned her beautiful, tear-stained face to me and said plaintively, you are my only hope. Wonderful. I just adopted a gorgeous stray kitten in the process of breaking up with my cheating wife. Why does this have to happen to me? Even worse, this particular woman looked like the cover of Sports Illustrated. I was sure that her presence would not help in the process of divorcing Brenda, but what else could I do? I was planning my first steps as I merged onto I-25 and headed north. I knew I needed to find a place to live because I wasn't going to live with my soon-to-be ex-wife. So, I decided that I would drop off my Stargirl first while I went to the house. The Marriott Albuquerque is a 15-story monolith in the area where I lived. It was a little too grandiose and expensive for my taste, but I wanted an anonymous place for Stella, and there's nothing better for anonymity than a big conference hotel. I was going to go back and try to figure out what to do with Stella once Brenda and I had discussed the basics and I had gathered a few things that would be needed. I told her to stay in the car while I checked us in. She asked why, and I didn't want to explain that if I walked her through the lobby, we'd end up at the Albuquerque Journal. She looked so gorgeous, especially in that tight suit, so I said, you never know, authorities may be looking for aliens. She got an expression of absolute horror and said anxiously, I'll wait. I saw what they did to the people on the ship that crashed. Apparently, she imagined that she would be cut up like a lab rat. Checking in took a while because they had to find a room with 2 beds. I walked up the back door and led Stella up the stairs to our room. As soon as we entered the room, she walked around as if she had never seen so much luxury. I said, there are no such places on her planet. I had already resigned myself to talking to her like an alien. She replied, no, my planet is the same size as yours, but we have 100 times the population, so we live like rodents in small rooms and huge towers, each room with basic amenities. I thought she had just described Manhattan, but I said, well, try to relax. It will take some time. I showed her how to work the TV, and she acted as if she had never seen anything so ancient, but she immediately became fixated on a cosmetics commercial. I closed the door while she was engrossed in the TV and went back down to the car. It was about midnight, it had been a long day, and I wanted to begin the painful process of figuring out why Brenda had betrayed me tomorrow after I'd gotten some sleep. But I needed to settle preliminary formalities. My wife was lying on the sofa in the living room when I arrived. She was wearing her old robe and looked both devastated and beautiful. My arrival woke her up, she stirred, sat up, and her gorgeous bare legs swung off the couch. She said shyly, hey, you're finally home. I responded softly and lovingly, yes, I need to grab a few things and arrange to talk tomorrow. I also wanted to make sure you were okay. She stood up and ran toward me, burying her head in my chest and sobbing profusely. Oh God, Davy, I am so sorry. I never expected this to happen, I'm such a fool. I held her and stroked her back while she cried. Perhaps too abruptly, I said, well, it happened. Now we both need to deal with the consequences. We will begin this process in the morning, but I'm so emotionally drained that I want nothing more than to sleep right now. She leaned back in my arms, looked at me with a burning gaze, and said, let's go to bed. I want to start fixing everything. I gave her a weak smile and said, that won't happen, Brenda. This will be difficult enough without complicating everything with intimate. I need to grab a few things, and I'm leaving. We will talk later. The next 15 minutes were excruciating. My wife, the woman I had loved for almost a third of my life, followed me, crying and begging me to stay as I gathered clothes, toiletries, and my laptop. Finally, I stopped, turned to her, and said angrily, listen, what did you expect? Did you think I would just accept your affair with that man as the price to pay for saving my marriage? I had never spoken to her like that before. This was her first hint that there could be serious consequences. She started whining, it's only been a few weeks. You were never supposed to find out. I was so careful. This confirmed what I suspected, this was intentional. My heart exploded like the Death Star. I said, perhaps a little cruelly, you play, you pay. Now we both lose. I need to get out of here, or I'll say things I'll regret. I closed my suitcase, picked up my laptop, and headed to the car. Brenda followed me the whole way, sobbing, "Don't go, please don't go. I'll do anything." It was heartbreaking. I'm a nerd, so of course, I had to analyze everything first. It was obvious that Brenda did not have a plan B. She expected to have a little fun and then return to life as my loving wife. Secondly, whatever her motive, she always knew that what she was doing was wrong. Finally, her reasons were more complex than simply helping herself through a difficult period. My wife was a teacher, right down to the tips of her colored nails. It also no doubt explained her strange fascination with this idiot's rehabilitation. However, that didn't explain her affair with him. Of course, Brenda probably thought the situation was temporary, and since no husbands were harmed in creating her fantasy, her actions were completely justified, at least in her own mind. I didn't like it, and I didn't sympathize with it, but I knew ultimately it was Richard Tadwell who needed to be brought to justice. Tadwell probably saw it as part of the game he played throughout his protracted youth. Cool guys got hot girls, so naturally, Tadwell had to have my wife. Of course, I blamed Brenda too, but it was due to Tadwell's tricks that she turned to the dark side. So I didn't intend to unleash dark web hell on Brenda like I intended to do with Tadwell. However, our marriage was complete history. Nothing short of time travel could revive it. My thoughts returned to my little star girl. It was about 1 a.m. when I entered, trying to be as quiet as possible. I knew Stella was incredibly graceful. Her costume left nothing to the imagination, but I didn't realize how toned her body was, toned sides, muscular legs, and real abs. She said softly, "I knew you would need comfort after your conversation with your companion." What kind of feminine compassion is this? First Brenda, now her, "Are all women women of easy virtue?" Then I felt her touch on my mind, and she recoiled, jumping to her feet in embarrassment. She quickly threw on one of those fluffy white hotel robes, looking puzzled. The robe was 3 or 4 sizes too big, making her appear like a 6-year-old. Her perfect face changed from alabaster to a blazing red. She gasped, "I'm so sorry." I saw it. Life is completely different here. I said angrily, "What did you see?" Her little game was starting to get annoying, or maybe I was just fed up with other people, especially women. She said simply, "How inappropriate my actions are." You are conflicted. You don't want to be separated from your companion, but you don't see how you can be with her. I looked stunned. Maybe she did read minds. She added sympathetically, "The fact that she gave herself away is not an obstacle. You know that she only wants you. It is disrespect, a deliberate attempt to deceive you. That is what you consider unforgivable. You do not know how you can maintain your self-respect if you ignore the lack of attention she showed you by entering into a secret relationship." Okay, I didn't know how she did it, but that was the problem in a nutshell. It was a matter of preserving my pride. Pride is the deadliest sin because it concerns who you are. Lust, greed, gluttony, laziness, envy, anger, these are simple crimes you can overcome by suppressing the desire. But pride is innate. Pride dictates how you see yourself and how you behave. If you have too much pride, you're a smug jerk. If you have too little, you're a wuss. The problem is that the mindset required to maintain an acceptable balance must be constantly adjusted as new challenges arise. Otherwise, you sacrifice your self-respect. I could accept Brenda sleeping with Tad if she could convince me that she had learned her lesson. The real trauma was that she deliberately conspired to share her intimate self with a person I hated. The pleasure Tad got from conquering Brenda must have been more rewarding than the intimate self. That violation required an appropriate response, otherwise, I would lose all sense of personal self-respect or dignity. To me, the only acceptable response to deliberate betrayal would be to end the marriage. Of course, Brenda would have her excuses. They might even seem convincing at first glance, but what do you say to someone who decides to cheat and then lies about it? What could Brenda say to reassure me that she wouldn't do this again? It was a real existential dilemma. Sartre would be pleased. Stella was clearly following my thoughts as these feelings passed through my mind, and yes, I began to believe that she could actually do it. Her beautiful face reflected my changing emotions as I considered the situation. She said enthusiastically, I will be your companion. We are both single now. This remained to be seen, but it was late, and I had a difficult day ahead. I said, "Do you mind if we sleep now?" She nodded and said, "Our sleep cycles are not like yours, but I need to turn off my mind, and the darkness helps me do that." Okay, that was interesting. Is she really a robot? I turned off the light because I didn't want to think about it. Brenda met me at the door. She looked terrible. She said sadly, "Polly called me names last night." Apparently, she saw the video that Tad was sent around the world. I didn't see it because I'm not on his contact list. I looked skeptical. She said with a feeling of shame, "He took me off his phone when we started dating. He said he wanted to avoid suspicion." I thought to myself, "What an idiot," Brenda said. "I saw the clip and all the incriminating messages. By the way, thanks for not showing me. I don't know how I could meet my friends after seeing those vile things." She added sadly, "I don't know why Richard sent these things out, but he ruined his life. Polly is divorcing him, and the Air Force is starting an investigation. Adultery is a crime in the Army, you know." Then she realized she meant something else and hastily added, "I haven't spoken to Richard since my world fell apart. Polly told me all about it." I might warn Brenda that Tad's current problems are just the tip of the iceberg. I had much more diabolical thoughts about where his life would go once I reached the dark web, but that was between me and Tad. My current goal was to secure an acceptable exit from the marriage. Like every morning for the past 14 years, we sat at our kitchen table and drank delicious French coffee. I'm sure I looked just as depressed as she did. Her eyes were puffy and red from crying, her hair was tousled, and she looked like she hadn't slept. People react differently to betrayal. The more emotional ones lose control, they cry, scream, throw things, and engage in self-destructive behavior. This is because they are frustrated by their inability to change the injustice of their circumstances. I guess it's cool if that's who you are. Temperamental outbursts may even seem good at the time, but they are self-destructive. You get nothing but anger and disappointment. The key to maintaining personal pride lies in how you respond to it. Brenda and I were both strong-willed, that was part of the attraction. We were practical people who could always accept what we couldn't change, and we had the wisdom to know the difference. We also knew that the circumstances were what they were, and we had a responsibility to deal with this as civilly as possible. We had 14 good years, and none of us wanted to ruin those happy times. Therefore, there was no melodrama, just two people who once loved each other coping with an unthinkable tragedy in the best possible way. She looked at me with sincere hope. I stared back with an inevitable sense of dread. She continued, "I knew at the moment I saw the video clip that it meant nothing to me, which makes my actions even more baffling." I continued to just stare at her, devastated. She sighed and said with an ironic laugh, "It's better that way. I probably wouldn't respect you if you wanted to stay married." Brenda was a very tough and pragmatic woman. I said, "It's not the night that was bad enough, but the deception was the deciding factor." Then I paused. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I said with deep grief, "Why did you conspire with that pathetic fool to deceive me?" Her face turned pale. She dropped her head onto her attractive chest and began to cry, the strands of her hair hiding her beautiful face. I waited. Finally, she collected herself, wiped her eyes, and said with intensity in her voice, "When do you think I fell?" This question took me by surprise. I shrugged and said, confused, "Why is this important?" She replied, "Because it proves what a stupid woman I am." She stopped and collected her thoughts. She then said, "Before we fought over Richard, I didn't do anything that didn't pass my husband's test. He probably gave me signs, but I was too stupid to see them. I thought your concerns were misplaced and juvenile. The next time he came, I told Richard what you told me, and he assured me that he would stop coming. That's when it happened. I thought the situation was resolved and was about to walk him to the door, but first, I took our coffee cups to the sink. He came up behind me and kissed me. I didn't expect it, so I hesitated, got confused, and at that moment, I was lost." Brenda saw my agony and added softly, "It had nothing to do with a man, it was the situation, the very feeling of being forbidden. I've always been a good girl, and now here I am, having an intim with my neighbor, she added sadly. Then there was self-justification. I see myself as a moral person. I knew he forced me first, but most of the time, I was completely involved. How can you justify this? Brenda gave me a grim smile and said, my self-perception couldn't handle the truth because otherwise, I would have been just a woman of easy virtue, and I didn't want to go there voluntarily. I refrained from commenting. Seriously, are you asking me if I believe you? Answer completely, she replied. Brenda loves Intim. I think everyone in the area knew it. This was the reason why she was considered so attractive. A normal person would make a mental note and move on, but a sociopath like Tad would see Brenda's attractiveness as an opportunity. And of course, he was right. When Sir Edmund Hillary was asked why he climbed Everest, he replied, because it was there. The same with Brenda, she was there, so Tad had to rise to the challenge, so to speak. Why did he do such a disgusting thing? Because he could. It was part of his need to prove, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say, convince himself, that he was as powerful and entitled as he thought. This is a characteristic of a true narcissist, a person who has no idea that other people have feelings. Brenda Winston said, never underestimate the power of guilt in a good Catholic girl. My actions killed me, so I desperately needed the opportunity to forgive myself. She added hesitantly, it was obvious I wouldn't like it. Then Richard started crying. He told me how much I meant to him, how I saved his life. That's when I found my salvation. I saved him, a sensitive and misunderstood soul, from a bad situation. Brenda Winston said, I won't lie, the night was amazing. It was just so new, so excitingly forbidden. I knew it was wrong, but my excuse was that you'll never know, so you won't be wounded. It was a sad illusion, but what other options did I have? Her voice dropped to a whisper as she said, with a feeling of guilt, the seal was broken. I was a cheater, so yes, I met him 3 more times. It was the same as the last time. I flew down, and we met at the hotel. She realized how much she had upset me and took my hand in hers, her eyes searching my face. She said, I was 2 people. Most of me was your devoted wife. I never lost an ounce of love or respect for you. Then she winced and added, but the other part of me loved being rough. It wasn't love. I thought it was okay because you'd never know, at least, that was my selfish reasoning. I was a dishonest fool, both for you and for myself. She finished, the irony is that I just told him that this was the last time. He said he wanted one to remember me, and I was already in the room, so I thought, why not? Is this pathetic? She paused and said, this is my story. I know you, and I understand the consequences. I take full responsibility for my actions and will sign any agreement you offer me. I will do this because I love you and know that it's the right thing to do. I finally realized that you can admire your opponent after a hard battle. This is how I felt about my soon-to-be ex-wife, Brenda. She may have been a cheater in one incarnation, but the woman I loved was now in control of the process. In the end, this man completed the job with dignity. I hugged her as I left and said, I'll contact Jim Eastman. He's been our family lawyer since the divorce will be relatively amicable. He will be able to represent both of us. I added, then I'll disappear for a while. I have wounds that need to be healed, and I want to do it in a private place. I'll have to negotiate with Sandia, but they owe me, so I don't think they'll mind. She put her hand on my cheek, looked sadly into my eyes, and said, I understand, and I'm sorry. I'll be here if you change your mind. She started crying as she closed the door. I drove to the nearest park and vomited. Now there was only an empty landscape in front of me. It was terrifying. It's funny how people's moral positions change depending on the circumstances. I was divorcing Brenda because of her secretiveness. At the same time, I was living with a woman who was much more beautiful than my wife, and Brenda knew nothing about it. So, who is the liar now? Of course, I couldn't tell Brenda that this woman was with me because she was from another planet. Oh, and by the way, did I mention she's a telepath? I would be locked in a room with padded walls. I was also sure that Brenda would have a hard time accepting any assurances that my relationship with Stella was purely platonic, especially when she saw her. Although I had temporarily settled things in one direction, an even stranger problem awaited me. Stella was still in her robe when I returned. She watched, fascinated, as the TV played an episode of Friends. "I studied Earth culture," she said excitedly. I highly doubted that Chandler, Ross, Joey, Monica, or Rachel represented any culture outside of TV land, but I asked, "Have you eaten anything?" She said happily, "Yes, I ate my waffle for the day," pointing to the device on her wrist. She took one of the waffles out of her wrist device and showed it to me. It was a half-inch cube. All I could think about was Soylent Green. "Do you want anything else?" I asked. She replied, satisfied, "No, that's enough for the next 24 hours. I asked, "And you live on this?" She said, "Of course. It's a complete diet." "Does it have a taste?" I ordered food for myself through room service. She looked puzzled and asked, "Why? Is it supposed to have a taste?" The idea struck me. She really does make a convincing impression of someone who has never lived on Earth. Although I didn't believe it, it was too cliché. I asked, "How old are you?" She said absent-mindedly, still watching the antics of the fun group in Central Perk, 277 for my next birthday. She looked 26. I whistled and joked, "You're pretty well preserved for an old lady." She snapped back, "What do you mean, old? I've only lived a quarter of my normal lifespan." I didn't argue with the crazy lady. Instead, I said, "We'll have to buy you clothes. You can't wear what you came to Earth in." She said, offended, "What's wrong with my suit? This is the latest style on the Mare MHCK." I nodded towards the screen and said, "You need to look more like these women if you want to fit in. Otherwise, people might start thinking you're not from here." With a wiggle of my eyebrows and a wink, I conveyed the concept of alien autopsy. She looked horrified and said, "How can I wear anything else? This is all I have." "I have an idea," I said. "Your current outfit wouldn't look out of place at Walmart. We can buy you clothes there." At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and the room service boy wheeled in a cart filled with bagels and salmon. I tried to tip him, but he couldn't take his eyes off Stella and crashed into the door on his way out. I spread cream cheese on my bagel and said, "Try this, this is what we eat here." She took a bite, her eyes rolled back, and she trembled all over. She said, breathlessly, "Is this what taste means?" An hour later, we were entering the Walmart in San Mateo. Stella constantly stumbled upon shop windows, looking around in fascination. She said with delight, "Look at all these beautiful things." I'd never heard anyone talk about Walmart products like that. The Chinese would be flattered. Brenda spent 2 hours in the clothing aisle and another 40 minutes in the cosmetics section. She said seriously, "I learned about all this on the home shopping network." One thing that was obvious from the very beginning was Stella's lack of underwear, so while she was trying on clothes, I moved toward the women's underwear section. Women may not realize this, but no man wants to be seen in the women's tech section of any store. Therefore, I approached the saleswoman as if she were a dealer in illegal substances. Her badge said Ruby Sue. I asked Ruby Sue if she could sell me some basic lingerie. She looked at me askance, as if she thought I was buying it for myself. I nodded towards Stella and said, "This is for her." Stella sat on the floor happily trying on shoes. I said explanatorily, "She's special." Ruby Sue nodded and winked. Apparently, this was a regular part of their clientele. She asked, "What size is she?" I said, "I have no idea. Seriously, men don't know anything about breasts. We just love playing with them." The saleswoman said, "She looks like a 32D or a double D." I said, "I'll go with the biggest size, they're huge." Stella changed clothes in the fitting room. Walmart had no problem allowing me in as her guardian. I imagine this happens to them often. I had to get used to the fact that my star girlfriend had no complexes about her body. She simply took off her suit and happily put on her new lingerie. The bra required some explanation when she finally got it on, and by the way, I was right about the size. She wore a white blouse and a plaid skirt that made her look like a student from one of the prestigious colleges. The clothes may have been from Walmart, but the body was extraterrestrial. I really wanted Stella out of my life. She was extremely complex, and her alien behavior made it difficult to concentrate on important things. It was like taking care of a 5-year-old child, but unlike a child, Stella literally stopped traffic wherever she appeared. I was especially worried about being seen in public with her, at least until all the pieces fell into place. My soon-to-be ex-wife didn't deserve this revelation. Yes, I knew it was all Brenda's fault, but cool guys don't party in the end zone after a touchdown, it's just a lack of class. I could tell Brenda about Stella, but what would that do? This doesn't mean I'm cheating on my soon-to-be ex-wife, we're already getting divorced. So when we got back to the room, I said, I want to take you to dinner tonight. It'll be like what we do on Earth, we dress up and spend the evening talking. You saw it on TV, right? She nodded vigorously. I asked, do you want to try it? My star girl was very inspired. Apparently, she saw something similar on Real Housewives and wanted to try it. She also wanted to continue her taste experiment. I said, I need to take care of personal matters. I'll be back around 6 o'clock in the evening to pick you up. I didn't want to talk about Stella's future while sitting in our room. I spent the day working on plans for the separation. It would have been an easy divorce since it was amicable, easy, except for the part where my heart should have been broken. Part of me still wondered why I was doing this. That is until the ghost of Richard Tadwell popped up and said, yeah, why are you doing this, man? She's so good in bed. Thanks, turd, that was just the reminder I needed. In gratitude, I spent some time on Silk Road buying him a few nice gifts, such as an anonymous beating and a controlled substance charge. It cost bitcoins. I walked past the advertisements for hired killers. I wanted Turd to suffer for a long time, and he will feel it when I finish exposing him on the dark web. This place is scary. I also made arrangements to take a couple of weeks off. My team could handle it without me, and the bureaucrats didn't care what I did as long as I protected their asses. I needed to help Stella, whether it would be psychological help or astrophysical help was still not clear. Stella was ready when I returned. She looked great. I knew my star girl was beautiful, but I just stood there with my mouth open. In turn, she looked absolutely terrified. She must have used something like YouTube to learn how to apply makeup. She hadn't worn it until now. The enhancement elevated her extraterrestrial beauty to an intergalactic level. We just went downstairs to a restaurant that wasn't fancy, but we had no chance of going to one of the prestigious places without attracting attention to Stella. She might even attract the paparazzi. A woman of such beauty should be famous, right? The last thing I wanted was for Brenda to think I had a replacement ready, not because I was trying to avoid appearing vindictive, but I just knew that our divorce would be much less constructive if Brenda thought I had traded her for a better person. Stella was wearing an emerald green dress that matched her incredible eyes perfectly. She even wore pretty heels. They made her legs even more amazing. She was either incredibly flexible or used anti-gravity to master walking in heels. Stella said excitedly, "Do I look good? Is this what you expected?" It was perhaps the biggest understatement since Houston. We have a problem. I wondered if there was an insecurity gene built into the X chromosome. My only concern was that I would have to fight off predators with a stick. When we were seated, I ordered for both of us. I tried to keep it simple, as Stella claimed to have lived her entire life on what looked like fish food. She insisted on trying everything I ordered. She continued to give me thoughtful glances. She knew why we were there. Remember, she supposedly reads minds. Finally, I said, "Okay, so how do we get you back to your planet?" She stopped halfway and looked unhappy. "Why do you think I want to come back?" she asked. I replied, "Don't you have a family or perhaps a special person you want to return to?" I knew this sounded crazy, but it was much easier to act as if she simply came from another planet. She paused as if contemplating an answer, then said carefully, "I never had a family in KHH Psi. Children are not raised that way. There is no one to return to. They were probably all collected by KHH Roar." Then she hesitated and added shyly, "Maybe you are my special someone. Have you ever thought about it?" I said, "Unbelievably, how can you even say that? We've only known each other for 24 hours. She tapped her finger on her head and said, "I know everything about you. You are the one I value in a life partner. You are kind, decent, smart, funny, and adventurous. I know that your current partner made a huge mistake by doing what she did. I would never make such a mistake." Then it dawned on me, maybe this opened a way forward. But first, I needed to confirm something absolutely. I looked closely at Stella, trying to read her face, and said, "When I went to bed last night, you said that you needed to turn off your mind. What did you mean?" I knew the question was unexpected. I wanted to see what she would say. She laughed and answered immediately, "Our race has always interacted telepathically. We may have once communicated by voice, but our planet is much older than yours." She added casually, "Our telepathic receptors are omnidirectional. It's like human hearing, so there's always background noise. We screen our minds out of politeness. People on your planet don't do that. So, I have to filter it, and it's tiring. It helps if I can turn off my sensors. It's like your need for sleep." Wow, this was too detailed an explanation to make up. I said, stunned, "So what are you telling me? Really? Are you really an alien? But still, you're just a woman." It was like saying the State Route 71 Blackbird is just a plane. I was still trying to wrap my head around the idea that the gorgeous beauty sitting across from me was real. She gave me a gentle smile and said, "Of course I am. Countless humanoid civilizations inhabit the universe. We are all biologically similar. As I said, this is the most effective configuration." I added, still stunned, "Seriously, there's a portal to a million other worlds in White Sands, and you're really a refugee from another planet?" She said conversationally, as if we were discussing bus stops, "Well, now there's another portal in the Jurassic Mountains. It's near a place called CERN. They built it when your race started experimenting with subatomic particles. I think it's called the Large Hadron Collider. This is another great achievement. Wow, first I found my wife making love to another man, and now I'm talking to a real alien, and it wasn't an ugly little creature with Einstein's eyes. Human Spielberg was very wrong." Stella smiled brightly and said, "You believe me now?" I said, sounding a little dazed, "I believe you." She said joyfully, "So can I be your companion? I'm even ready to go through the commitment ceremony. This would bind us for life." I said, still a little hesitant, "Let's take this step by step. We're not using a killer device to ensure we stay together." She looked puzzled, as if she didn't understand how we could do this differently. I smiled lovingly, and for the first time, I felt loving instead of annoyed. She truly was a sweet, modest, and simple woman. I felt that underneath all this alien weirdness, there was an extremely pure soul. I said softly, "We need to learn to be bound, and I am still legally bound to another woman. This must be officially broken before we can be bound to each other." Well, if I was going to connect with this beautiful little alien, I might as well start speaking her language. The jump was sudden, but you know how it goes. I felt a natural attraction to Stella almost from the moment I discovered her in the desert. She was the embodiment of femininity in the physical sense, as beautiful as a movie star, but her friendly and joyful character attracted me. There was not a drop of anger or deceit in her. She said enthusiastically, "Now can we have a night?" It felt like a proposal from all the hot girls who had ever populated my most special teenage dreams, but of course, there was a catch. I laughed and said, "In our society, there are rules. We call them morals. These rules guide the process of commitment. They are really just common sense things you do to avoid hurting other people, but they are an integral part of human life. So, you will have to learn what it is before we can be connected." Stella looked like she wanted me to get to the point. I added, laughing, "One of those rules is that two people can't have an intim if they're involved with another person. Right now, I'm still bound by the promise I made to my ex. I will lose my honor if I do. Having intimate with you before this agreement is officially broken by mutual consent is not an option." Stella looked very disappointed, which didn't even come close to describing how I felt. I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. They were tiny and silky smooth, like a warm cup of tea in fine porcelain. This was the first time we touched each other. The feeling of intimacy and love exploded in my head like a supernova. Stella conveyed her feelings directly and without shielding, giving me an overwhelming sense of peace and satisfaction. I said, "I have no idea why I'm so lucky, but I know that we can live a happy life together, and that starts here and now. I'm human, you're not human, so it doesn't matter if it's 50. I spent a little time looking for a place for us, wanting a safe location close to the city where Stella could begin to acclimate to Earth and its ways. During the 2 weeks I took off to set up the place, I racked up a huge Marriott account. I felt like I needed to keep Stella a secret. I know this sounds hypocritical because Brenda's secrecy is what ended our marriage, but I hid my star girlfriend for another reason. First of all, I didn't have a night with her. More importantly, our marriage was already over, it just wasn't officially terminated yet. I wanted to keep the process amicable. Many divorces descend into bitterness and hostility. People make noise, beat each other up, and experience emotional distress. However, the process can proceed without hostility and chaos. Brenda and I were worthy enough to interact in a civilized manner, or maybe we were just sticking to the old principle of never showing that you're sweating. Either way, neither of us showed how hurt we were. Instead, we discussed it until the end, which, while not ideal, was something we could both live with. During one of these discussions, the topic of other people's perspectives came up. The transition to other relationships was a foregone conclusion. We were both quite attractive and heterosexual, so there would inevitably come a time when we began this journey. Brenda said, "Davey, I want to talk about where we go from here. I've been asked out by a lot of men since we broke up, and I want your permission to start dating again." It wasn't as patronizing as it sounded. Obviously, we'd both find other people. Brenda was wonderful, and of course, I had already found my one, so I was actually glad and relieved that she showed me enough respect to make the first move. I smiled my kindest smile and said, "You have been a wonderful wife, and I know you will be the same for the next lucky guy. You are a stunningly attractive woman, and it would be a crime to hide your beauty. So, we both need to start the process of leaving each other." She looked at me sadly, her expression saying, "I wish we could move together, not apart." I added softly, "We both need a fresh start." I believed in it. There is never a way back once the connection is broken, no matter how much you want it. If you do this, it will always be an imperfect compromise with the past. Stella gave me the promise of a bright future, and I wanted Brenda to have that same hope. I also recognized my star girlfriend. Stella could have emerged from a wormhole at the center of the galaxy, but her personality seemed like she came on a bus from Nebraska. She was simple, happy, and benevolent, not an infallible alien superintelligence. Although sometimes I had to warn her not to get into my head, she continued to peek in cautiously, like a devoted golden retriever, just checking, wanting to be sure. I rented a house in Sandia Heights, which was convenient for taking Highway 556 to the National Laboratories. The area was upscale but still had a rural feel, giving Stella space to walk around without worrying about close neighbors. The guy I rented the house from wanted to sell it, so we made a deal. Once the divorce was finalized, I would buy it from him for his asking price. At this time, the house was taken off the market, and the purchase took place a month and a half later. Helping Stella adapt to my world more than made up for any residual regrets about losing Brenda. Stella's world was a preview of Earth's future. It was catastrophically overcrowded and polluted to the point that trillions of its inhabitants had to live inside domes. Therefore, their society was highly regulated and limited. Each person was assigned a role at birth and spent their lives doing what was assigned to them. Stella herself was a console operator at the transportation center, so she had knowledge in one small area that was completely irrelevant in my world. Imagine mobile phones. They are ubiquitous, and everyone uses them, but very few of us understand how cell phone electronics or the cellular network work or are able to build one. This was Stella's situation. She was not one of those who created and controlled the technology or directed the work. She was a simple technician. Now, let's go back to the 18th century. Knowing how to use a cell phone wouldn't have done you any good back then, and at the same time, everyone around you would know how to handle life better than you. This was the challenge Stella faced. Even though she had experience of a world that was much more advanced, she had to learn to live here. She spent hours on the internet. They had something similar in her world, but access was built into the human mind. All you had to do was think. Now Stella had to master social networks and everything else related to life online. Even worse, she had to do it on a device that she considered one step above a stone tablet. When Stella learned to talk, dress, and behave like an ordinary earthly woman, I began to take her to different places like an ordinary couple. One evening, we had dinner at Antiquity, a restaurant located in Albuquerque's historic square that serves the best shut-eye in the city. Brenda and I ate there often. No man would feel completely confident appearing in public with a woman like Stella. She caused a stir wherever she went. People stared, reacting like the inhabitants of the African savannah when a lion appears. However, I wasn't worried about losing her since she didn't seem to notice other people. It was as if I had left an imprint on her, like a duckling following its mother. That night, she wore a classic little black dress with a simple string of pearls. She had such perfect features that when you looked at her, you felt as if you were gazing at a beautiful work of art. All the men, and some women, looked at her with lust as she sat comfortably in the intimate booth against the wall. We shared a plate of Karoo, and Stella was so enamored with the little pieces of beef that she quietly purred in my head. At that moment, a friendly voice said, "Hi, Davy. I knew I would meet you sooner or later." I had heard this voice for 14 years, so I replied happily without looking up, "Brenda, good to see you." She was standing next to our table with a guy who was clearly her date. She looked as energetic and cute as ever. I stood up from the booth and said, "Stella, this is my ex-wife Brenda." Stella looked up and said calmly, "It's nice to finally meet you, Brenda. Davy has nothing but good things to say about you." The full force of Stella's beauty made Brenda and her companion blink, like the reaction you have when stepping out of the shadows into bright light. Brenda, looking embarrassed, said, "This is my fiancé, Tom." We shook hands. I knew who Tom Holland was. He was the largest developer in the entire Middle Rio Grande Basin and was rumored to be a GOP candidate for a Senate seat. "We've both definitely upped our ante," I said. "Nice to meet you, Tom, and I wish you both nothing but happiness." Then there was the typical smiling retreat maneuver that people do when they can't get out of a situation fast enough. I sat back down, and they went to their table. Holland took one last incredulous glance back. Stella said calmly, "She still regrets losing you, and this man has very dirty thoughts." The chance meeting with Brenda was just a coincidence. We were at Antiquity for a different reason. I looked into Stella's incredible emerald eyes and said, "I told you we have a commitment ceremony where two people commit to each other." She replied, "Yes, but there is no implant that guarantees fidelity." I said, "But we have a symbol that a woman wears to show her devotion." I had learned to somewhat mask my thoughts, so it was a surprise when I took out the ring. We can only promise to be faithful, but I would die before I betrayed that. The explosion of pure, genuine love almost knocked me out of the booth. She said enthusiastically, "Now can we have a night?" We had intim for the first time that night. I was nervous. It wasn't about performance, but rather the anxiety you feel when taking that last step with the most important person in your life. An additional complication was that this woman was not entirely human and came from a culture where the act of intimate was more transactional than intimate, so I wanted to take things slow. We both knew what would happen, so we went straight to the bedroom. I approached my star girl and looked into her unearthly emerald eyes. I said, "How do you start making love in your world?" She replied indifferently, "We just do it, there is no ritual." She added nervously, "I've never done this with someone I feel this way about, and I'm afraid I'll do something wrong." My thoughts were exactly the same, so I said, "Come here," and kissed her. She looked at me with wide eyes, as if she had never been kissed before and had just discovered that she liked it. Stunned, I said, "You've never kissed anyone?" She answered as if it were a stupid question, "What does this have to do with night?" I realized that this would be a special experience. We made love, and I thought to myself, I can't believe this amazing woman is mine. She slowly opened her eyes and looked at me in surprise. "Now I understand why people bond for life," she said. Stella and I had an incredible intimate life. She seemed to miss it. She said she had never had such an experience of intim with emotional attachment. She mentioned that she didn't even realize emotions were involved. Night in her world was like going to the gym. The whole world used a network for connections. If you wanted intimate, you simply chose the profile of your closest partner, had a night, and then left ratings and reviews. It may have been impersonal, but it was definitely effective. Stella said that emotional attachment made intimate sensations even more intense. I told her that this is why intimate in this world is called making love. This insight seemed to give her a significant social discovery. We got in touch a month after the divorce. Stella didn't want to use the term married. She said it didn't reflect her feelings for me. The binding concerned only her and me. This would be true even if Stella's relatives didn't live in another branch of the galaxy. It was just who we were. Stella insisted on Indian bondage, so her home world eventually translated into my head. I understood why she wanted to do it this way. Once we went through the ceremony, we decided to spend it in a special place, so we spent our wedding night in a half-dome tent. We were sitting on a rocky outcrop on Shield Face, a huge cliff outside Albuquerque in the Sandia Range. The sun was setting over the purple vastness of the desert landscape, and the city lights began to flicker in the growing darkness below us. Stella was delighted. Her planet may have been more advanced, but she paid for it with catastrophic overpopulation and environmental destruction. Life there was a joyless exercise. My world was a wonderful landscape of new experiences, and Stella celebrated every discovery she made. My bride wore rugged camp clothes rather than a long white dress. We reached the knife-edge cliff along a path that could only be traversed by experienced hikers and climbers. Stella handled it better than most. One of Stella's oddities was that she could handle any physical challenge effortlessly. I began to realize that, in addition to reading minds, my new wife had abilities that earthly inhabitants did not possess. We dangled our feet over the edge. The July evening was soft and balmy, and Stella told me to lie down on the rock. She lay down next to me, holding my hand. The sky darkened to shades of purple and red, the moon rose, and the first stars began to appear. Stella pointed to the Pleiades and said gently, "Focus on this." I followed her finger to a familiar cluster of stars. As I did, I felt her carefully enter my mind. She installed a tiny psychic beacon that broadcast a clear and stable signal of caring love. This formed a powerful subconscious connection between us. When she finished, she said in a benediction, "This will remain between us forever. We are now bound." And that's how we got married. It was not in the ordinary sense, but as deep, true, and permanent as any ceremony performed before a priest. Life went on like this for almost a year. It was an endless series of adventures and simple joys. I've never been happier. But, of course, the gods love to play tricks on me. I returned home from work on a beautiful fall day in the desert. The sun was shining, and the temperature was around 70 degrees. Football season had begun, and I had been wondering how the Lobos would fare in the Mountain West Conference this season. I walked in from the garage, humming a happy tune, and saw my wife. She stood in our kitchen with the most handsome man I had ever seen anywhere, in movies, on TV, on the cover of GQ. He was wearing the same suit as the one Stella had on when I first found her. Stella looked gloomy. She said, "Davy, we need to talk." These fateful words usually foreshadow grief, but I felt my little beacon emitting a clear, stable signal. Nothing had happened to disrupt our connection yet. However, my blood pressure shot up to heart attack levels because of the expression on Stella's face. She said resignedly, "It's Callow. He's a gruff grow. He's come to take me back to Invidium." The idea of a bounty hunter came to mind. I blinked back to reality, although I knew exactly what she was talking about. It was just a knee-jerk reaction. Besides being handsome like a Greek god, Callow was built like one. I wondered if there was anyone on Stella's planet who wasn't of unearthly perfection. He grinned disdainfully and said, as if you were talking to a pet, "We've been looking for Stella ever since she jumped through the portal. Now that we've found her, I'm here to bring her back." I said, "This is crazy. She loves me. Why would she want to leave with you?" The guy just looked at me as if he couldn't believe he was arguing with such an insignificant creature. Finally, he said, "She has no right to be here. It might alert your authorities to our presence." He then made a sound of annoyance, turned, and said, "I'm not here to argue with you, Earthling. Come on, Stella. The portal will only be open for a few minutes." Stella said angrily, "I told you I'm not coming back. I have a life here with a man. I owe nothing to you. Nothing you say or do will make me leave with you." Mr. UFO said scornfully, "You cannot be associated with a lower being. It is illegal. Either you come with me, or I will take you by force." With that, he grabbed one of Stella's hands and began to pull her toward the exit. Apparently, the guy had a UFO parked in our backyard. Stella tried to pull her hand away. I had to do something. I didn't stand a chance in a physical fight with him, but that's not my style. I said calmly, I know you're an alien superintelligence and all that, buddy, but have you noticed that everything you've done since you came in here is recorded? I pointed to the tiny security camera in the corner of the ceiling and said, if you're kidnapping Stella because your Nijian masters don't want her revealing your presence, how do you think they'll react when they find out you are proving the existence of extraterrestrial life through TMZ and Fox News? I laughed, trying to sound more confident than I was, and added, we have this thing called the internet. It's out of your league, but I can assure you that you will become a global viral sensation if you don't sit down with your flying saucer, and you won't go back to where you came from. Mr. UFO stopped and looked at the camera, puzzled. Apparently, superminds are not so observant, or maybe he underestimated us Earthlings. I knew what he was thinking. I said informatively, you're trapped. There's nothing local to erase, you'll never find the recording. It's broadcast to a cloud account, so smile. The alien released Stella's hand and turned to me. You won't be able to report it if you're vaporized, he said. With that, he pulled out what looked like a fountain pen. I didn't think he was going to write me a check. I wasn't afraid, I was inspired. I thought, at least I'll die protecting the woman I love, then I knocked him out. Stella held an old-fashioned cast iron frying pan in both hands. It was a very effective low-tech solution to a high-tech problem. The lighthouse in my head flashed brightly. It was Stella, soaring with joy. She said, I was always afraid that someone would come for me. I think we're finally safe. Of course, this presented us with a new problem. We needed to get rid of the body. There are many ghost towns around Albuquerque. The closest one was called Golden, which was the center of gold mining for the entire Albuquerque area in the 19th century, hence the name. There was a Catholic church, saloons, shops, a school, and even a stock exchange. But the gold ran out at the end of the century, and by the 1920s, Golden had become a ghost town. Their old cemetery is next to the restored church built in 1830. Stella and I drove 30 minutes from our house, with Hal strapped in the back seat. A la Weekend at Bernie's, the area was completely deserted, as we expected. I parked and left the headlights on. We dragged the body through brittle desert brush and into an area of old graves. I was aware of the urban legends I was mixing up while burying an alien in a ghost town. The ground was mostly a sandy bed, so digging was easy. It's not like they had the guy's fingerprints. He will remain a mysterious unknown if he is ever found. We threw him into a hole and buried him, then returned to the truck. It was 10 o'clock in the evening when we finished our ominous work. I plopped down in a chair by the fireplace, and Stella sat calmly in her usual position on the sofa. I asked, do you want to talk about it? After all, she had just killed a man. She looked at me calmly and said, there's nothing to talk about. I will never leave you. I did what needed to be done. I dug deeper, maybe because I'm an insecure weakling, but then again, Stella had just killed someone. I said, how does that make you feel? Okay, Snowflake, that's enough, she said simply. You are the person to whom I'm indebted, and Callow is going to turn you into a cloud of constituent particles. I could not let that happen. I promised to be your life partner, to support you in everything. I meant it. This captured all that mattered in one simple statement: married people take care of each other. This is a constant, regardless of the planet. This beautiful woman could have emerged from a wormhole from another branch of the galaxy, but she understood what love and loyalty meant. Time has passed, and we have grown old. Stella was fascinated by aging. She told me that the causes of aging are well understood, and if there is knowledge, then there is a way to control the process. We call it epigenetics here on Earth. We have even begun to conduct serious research on the manipulation of telomeres and genes, but the people in Stella's world perfected this process eons ago. It was like visiting a solarium. Every citizen went through a life cycle procedure. You lie down in a special device that scans you and repairs any defects, and then you're ready for the next cycle. Because these cycles were similar to Earth's lifespan, citizens in Stella's world lived very long lives, always in perfect physical condition. Now we both felt the weight of the happy years we had spent together. Stella's incredible beauty prevented her from experiencing the classic signs of aging. In fact, she was beautiful at any age. My passion for fitness kept me relatively healthy, but there was no way to avoid the terrible diagnosis that was draining my vitality. Stella was in despair when things became unbearable. My wife loaded me into our truck, and we headed south. There was a starry sky over the desert when she parked next to where we first met. We then began the painful journey through Jornada del Muerto to the obelisk. 4 miles is a long way for a nearly dead man, and it took several hours. Stella supported me every step of the way, her hand on my shoulder. Like a warrior wounded by life, the 12-foot monument was visible as a black presence against the starry sky. The desert was silent, and the wind was blowing from the west. I was sweating and breathing heavily from the effort. Stella released my hand and gently leaned me against the black lava of the obelisk. She was wearing the suit and the device on her arm that she had on when I first met her. She walked a few yards behind the obelisk and did something with the device. The air began to shimmer, and the stars in this part of the sky disappeared, giving way to a miniature galaxy. She came back to me, put my hand on her shoulder, and helped me get to that place. "We'll make you well again, my love." It was a deep night at the Trinity site, and the surroundings were as dark and lonely as a desert could be. Then a flicker appeared, which turned into a vague shape similar to a galactic wheel. The shimmer parted like a curtain, and 2 people walked through it before it disappeared. The man was fit and young, the woman was an absolutely magnificent example of femininity. They stood together for several long minutes, contemplating the night sky. Then they turned and walked, holding hands along the path toward the distant road. She said, with doubt in her voice like a wife who had been married for a long time, "Are you sure the truck will start, honey?" He replied in the patient voice of the archetypal husband, "Of course it will, my love. Just 1 day has passed. Now let's have breakfast, we have a whole life ahead of us." What do you think of our story today? In my opinion, the husband did the right thing by overhearing his wife and Todd's phone call. What's your opinion? Let me know in the comments. See you in the comments.